For those of you who are waiting, like I said, we'll get started in about 1 minute. The link right up here at the top of the yellow paper, if you paste that link into your address bar, that's where you can fill out the Google form to get your certificate. That's where all the notes are from all the World Language Wednesdays, etc. So you can use that link for that. And then in the chat box, I put the link to the folder of materials for today, and Nadine is going to continue to put that link in there as new people join. So I'm going to wait 1 more minute because I see we still have people joining, and then we'll go ahead and get going. Okay, it is 3:46. So, and I am recording this meeting. Does it say it's recording, Nadine? Yes, it is. Yes. Okay. So we are recording this meeting because it is a presentation. So if you don't want to be on the recording, you can turn off your mic. That's okay. So welcome everybody. I'm Kathy Shelton from the Ohio Department of Education, World Languages. I believe my colleague Ryan Wirtz is on here with me. I can't see everybody right now. So Ryan, you want to jump on and say hi if you're on here? I think he is. Maybe he's not. Okay. So real quick, it's been about a month or two since we did these when everybody went on spring break and went back to a more traditional classroom format, a lot of you. So we thought, let's just give the teachers a break. So we have this week's World Language Wednesday on the OTES 2.0. And I will be repeating this throughout the summer. And like I said, we're recording it. So if you know people who couldn't make it, there'll be other options. And then we have one more next Wednesday, which will be on a program called Talk Abroad that Lisa Saab from Toledo is going to do for us. So really quick, our meeting norms, just make sure to mute your microphone when you're not talking. Okay, sorry. Like I said, we are recording, so you don't have to use your camera. We want to keep everything in here safe and positive, which is never an issue I find with world language teachers. Number 4, post questions or comments in the chat box. Since this is OTES 2.0, I know there's going to be a lot of questions. So the way I'm going to do it this time around, which is a little bit different, is I'm going to go through everything I have first. But as I'm going through it, please post questions in the chat box, and then you may find that I answer it a little bit later on. And then if I don't, I'll make sure we'll do all the questions at the end. There'll be time at the end. I did set this one up until 5 o'clock just to give us a little extra time. But again, you know, it's your discretion how long you stay. And I will post the notes from the chat box, post the recording, etc. And again, if you need to speak, for now, let's just do questions. But at the end, if you're like, I need to share something, I need to just ask you, Kathy, it's too complex, just type share if you're like, I need to speak instead. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing this screen. So go ahead. I think we've put about 10 times the materials for this are in a folder in Google. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen also and open that folder. There we go. Okay, so you're welcome to go into the Google folder, or there we go, or you can just follow along with me. There's a lot in here. I'm not necessarily going to pull everything up, but I wanted to at least show you where everything is. So the handout we're going to use today is number 1. So if you want to open that, so you'll have to download your own copy. So you'll be able to view it, but if you want to type in it, just save a copy for yourself. And if you want to take notes on it while I'm talking, you're welcome to do that. Number 2 and 3 are some sample assessments that I just wanted to show you that you can use. The rest of the information is actually from the OTES 2.0 main page, but it's things that I thought there's a lot on that page, and I thought these were the ones that are teachers most likely to look at, like what's high quality student data. Oh, I'm sorry, here's the ODE, World Language Proficiency Rubrics. Actually, you know what, oh, that's all right. The teacher evaluation, the OTES 2.0 rubric, the main page with all the information, the PowerPoint, etc. So I am going to go ahead and click on number 1. So this is the handout that we're going to be using today. And how I want to start today, and like I said, those of you who might have just joined, just put any questions you have in the chat box. And oh, Ryan is here. Hi, Ryan. Thanks. If you have any questions, just put them in the chat box. And Nadine is going to help me out by putting the link to or Ryan, if you still have it, the link to the certificates. And actually, I'll put the link. Ryan, did you happen to copy the link for the certificates, or Nadine? I'll tell you what, let me.
No,
Yeah,
unfortunately, because I had to sign out and sign back.
I'm sorry, Kathy, I put them in the chat for the certificates, and then for today's materials is right underneath.
Okay, so perfect. You might want to put it, maybe just put it one more time for new people. Right, so if you need a certificate, there's one tiny URL, and then if you need this handout or this folder, there's another one. Okay, so let's get going. So OTES 2.0 was supposed to go into effect last year, but with the lovely COVID episodes, everything got put off a year. So some teachers have already been piloting 2.0 and maybe already have done it. You know if you're doing it or not, because if you did an SLO, you are not doing 2.0, you're still doing 1.0. So if you did do SLOs, this is the last year you were able to do an SLO. I'm sure that may be greeted with varying degrees of happiness or sadness. But what I wanted to do to start out with is I wanted to do a comparison of what the old OTES did and what the 2.0 does. And I'm keeping it from the point of view of world languages. So some of it is general, but some of it is also world language specific. The one thing I will say is I think that as world language teachers, I know it was so stressful with the SLOs, and it felt like a lot of compliance and jumping through hoops, and they really have revamped the process to make it more where it's actually about teachers using data and instruction to help kids learn better. So I think most teachers will look at this and be like, this is more typical of what teachers actually do. So actually, let me make my thing a little bit higher because I think I used a smaller font. Okay, so on the OTES, on the old OTES, remember how you had the student growth and whatever the kids, if they hit their goals, it was 50% of your teacher evaluation or 25%. I know they kept changing it. The new 2.0 no longer does that at all. The whole focus within the law and everything is now it's on when the teacher gets high quality student data, it's how are you using this data? How are you using it to enhance your practices, to guide instruction, to improve student learning? So the whole focus has changed from student growth to really teacher growth. So it's no longer about, did all my kids hit their growth target? It's now about, okay, I've assessed my kids, I have some data. How is this data helping me become a better teacher and improve learning? So I think for all of us, we're like, that's what teaching is about. We learn where our kids are and we do what we can do to make them better. The other thing is the whole piece with the student data, because you still have to gather the data, is it's actually embedded into the new rubric. So remember before, like I said, you had the rubric and then you had the student piece. Now there's only one rubric. And the whole student data piece is just one line in the rubric, and it should not weigh any more than any other part of the rubric. So it shouldn't be like, if my kids don't meet these goals, that's going to tank my whole evaluation. That entire stressful piece, what has been eliminated. I see a question about printing the handouts. If you put in the link, the second one that says OTES-WL, it's a Google Drive. You'll have to just share them, like download a copy to yourself, and then you can have everything. Okay, so the old OTES 1.0, the rubric was aligned to the Ohio Standards for the Teaching Profession. The new one is also. If you've never looked at the Ohio Standards for the Teaching Profession, there's a link in there to click on those. The other thing is that the new rubric, they've simplified it. It went from like 10 or 13 to 6 or something like that. I'd have to look at it exactly. But the new rubric is simplified. It's clearer on whether you're accomplished or skilled or developing, et cetera. And the other thing that's huge is that there's a lot more local control in the process. Your school now determines a lot more. Before, there was a lot that was written into the law and there was a lot of compliance involved. They've really made very good steps to make this a much more local control, and where the district decides and the teachers decide what's best, instead of trying to have everybody have to fit in the same framework. So I think that is a relief for those of us who don't have that, sort of state assessment. The next change, in the old OTES 1.0, there was this whole mathematical calculation about 80% and 60% and all that. The new one, completely different. Now on the rubric, you're actually evaluated holistically. And so what they look at is they look at the components of the rubric. They look at your professional growth plan, which I think I was talking to our OTES person that you should make after your final evaluation this year. And there's a link to that if you're like, what's my professional growth plan? That's what everybody makes. That's not, that's not the improvement plan. That's just a plan that all teachers have. So when the evaluator is overlooking the rubric and looking at your professional growth plan, they are supposed to look at the preponderance of the evidence of the rubric. So, sort of like in languages where we look and we're like, okay, the student was sort of developing here and advanced here and meet the goals here. That's sort of what they're supposed to do. So it's no longer just, sorry, you failed this part of the rubric. It's really a preponderance of the evidence, which I think we can all agree, given that we all sort of score that way, that's a good way to do it. Okay, before, SLOs were required, especially for those of us who didn't have a state test. So that's what I was saying before, that if you did an SLO this year, that meant you were still doing the old OTES. Starting in the fall, SLOs are no longer allowed. So that whole huge form that you had to fill out before, that's no longer allowed by law to happen. However, the thing about the SLO, remember the SLO was like that entire form that had, I don't know, it had like 7 or 8 different sections. Within the SLO, if you recall, a lot of us or a lot of teachers did a performance-based assessment within the SLO. That part has not changed. So if you're like, oh my gosh, I wrote this great assessment that we used and now we're not using SLOs anymore, the SLO itself is gone, but you can still use like that assessment. Like if you had a really good performance-based assessment, you were grading it with rubrics, it got the proficiency levels, that part is still okay. So don't throw that out. You're not reinventing anything. So those of you, I know a lot of teachers were doing that. So that piece can still be used. So that's good news. Shared attribution was allowed under the old one. And that's where like the district could say, okay, 10th grade math scores is what everybody gets evaluated on. That is no longer allowed. So if you were in a district that did shared attribution and you're like, I've never written an SLO for languages, I don't even know what that is, you are now going to have to do one. So the new law says that every teacher has to be evaluated on their own impact on student learning. So you're no longer going to be evaluated on what the ELA or the math teacher or whatever your district might have used. So if you're like, I've never had to do this before, you will now have to do it. In the old OTES, it was, remember like that first week of school was everybody gave a pre-test to get the kids to score as low as they could. And then they gave a post-test at the end because we wanted to show as much growth as possible. This whole piece has changed because I think we all remember it was kind of stressful because the kids were taking this pre-test in every single one, or if you had like a level 1 language, you're like, the kids don't know anything anyway. So what happens now is the time period because you still have to show growth, the time period for showing growth is determined by the district, and it can vary by teacher. The recommendation from the state to schools is that you want to give the teachers a long enough period of instruction that they can show they had a true impact on student learning and growth. And we'll go a little bit more into that in the next section. But if you think about the data has to be aligned to the standards, and we'll look at this in a second also, but the new standards are aligned to proficiency levels, which all of us who use proficiency levels, for a student to move from like novice mid to novice high is not going to happen in a week or in a month, or if your district says, well, just give a unit test and show the growth, that's not going to happen in world languages. So that's what we mean about this piece right here. So you don't necessarily have to, the first week of school, say, oh, we got to give our pre-test or whatever. You just need to determine what's the best for the world languages. So could I give a pre-test? I'm in Spanish too. Could I give a pre-test, sometime within that first month or whatever of school? And by the semester, will the kids have shown enough growth, or do I want to wait a little bit longer? So again, these are the type of things that have changed and made it a much more local decision. So on the one hand, it's good because as world language teachers, you can say, wait, you can't just have us do a unit. We'll never be able to show growth by proficiency levels. But sometimes it's kind of bad because then it sort of could be all over the place. So you may have to do a little bit of, if your district gives a specific time period, you may have to do a little bit of explaining for world languages that we need a little more time than you're giving us. Or they may give, a lot of them may still just say, let's just do it for the year or do it for a semester. So again, that is no longer controlled by the state. That's up to the district. So be aware when they tell you, what the time period is for showing growth. Just be aware that it needs to be enough time for the language teachers to show growth within a proficiency level. Okay, and like I said, keep posting questions in the chat and I'll get through everything and then I'll take your questions. Okay, so before you had to give the pre-test and in the beginning, you gave the post-test at the end, and then that was your data. This has changed. You can still do a pre and post test if you want. If you're like, I like the pre and post test I had, but with the new thing, you still have to show 2 measures of student growth. Now, if you give a pre and a post test, that only serves as 1 data point. So you're still going to have a second data point, but I'm going to get into that a little bit more below. So just hang on for that. That's more applicable for like the teachers who were giving like the math state assessment or the ELA state assessment. Used to be all they needed. Now they will also have to have, in addition to the value added test, they additionally have to have another measure of student growth. So it won't affect us as much because we always did 2 anyway with the SLOs. Okay, now this one, well, I think will take a lot of pressure off teachers, at least that timing of that initial assessment. So in the old OTES, you had to do the SLO and you had to assess all the skills at once and show growth across all the skills. This has been broadened a little bit to give a little bit more flexibility to teachers. This time you can choose the skills to work on. So you have to show growth at least in 2 different areas. So this time you may give an IPA, you might be, like I said, you got a really good assessment. You're like, I'm just going to give this IPA, but you may look it over and say, you know what, the kids are struggling in reading and listening. So those are the only 2 that I'm going to focus on this year. Okay, so that's going to take a little bit of that relief off where it was rough to try and get all 4 skills and everything. And we're going to talk a little bit more about this below too. I just wanted to give you the overview. And you don't only have to focus on a weakness, you could focus on an area of strength, which we'll talk about in a second. Okay, before, as we mentioned, the SLO had that whole section where you had to document the kids' scores and put, here's where they are, here's their target, how many met growth, and you had that whole mathematical thing going on. In the new OTES 2.0 rubric, and the rubric is in the folder that I posted originally under that link. Sorry, I looked at the chat now. I lost my train of thought. Sorry about that. The rubric, is in that folder. But the section of the rubric that talks about the evidence says the teacher uses at least 2 sources of high quality student data. So that's why we're talking about you have to have 2 to demonstrate the growth or achievement over time. And you have to show clear evidence of growth for most students. So this is where, like I said before, you had to just put all this right in the SLO, what was the before and after. Now, the 2 pieces that I underlined, the district determines how the teachers are going to document it. So the district may say, I want a spreadsheet of where, what the assessment was and where they scored and how are you showing growth. And there's going to be other ways you might do a portfolio, et cetera. But so that's the thing that's going to now be determined by the district. How do they want you to document the growth? And the district also has to determine what does it mean by most students? Because it used to be something, I remember there was like percentages, I don't remember exactly about, you had to have a certain number of kids covered out of this many. And so now it says that you have to show achievement for most students. The district has to determine what does most student mean. Does that mean 51%? Does it mean 90%? Does it mean, that's again up to the district. So you can see a lot of these changes have gone from much more really rigid sort of compliance based to much more freedom within the districts, which could be a benefit or could be a pitfall. I'm going to look at some of the questions in the chat box really quickly just to see if there's anything related to this. No more common assessments. Okay, Beth, you can do common assessments if you want. And that's actually a good question. I'm going to answer it now, but I was going to go into it in the second part also. But since you put it and it can go in there. If you use a common assessment, it would, like, say you were using a common assessment for your Spanish 2 kids. And so you're looking at a common assessment that they took in Spanish 1. You could use that, and then you could give them like yours as like the first sort of pre-assessment. If everybody has to have taken the same test, all the kids have to have taken the same test. It can't be like some kids did and some kids didn't, which if it's common, I guess they all would, unless they came from a different school. And then you could use, like, say you gave a semester exam in Spanish 2, you could show the kids' growth. If the semester exam is similar to the common assessment, a similar format, whether it was an IPA or whatever you used, you could use your semester performance assessment, and you could use that to show growth, yes. So it has to be a similar type of tool, and that you're showing growth with all the same thing with all the same kids. I hope that makes sense. Some administrators are asking to be done by March so they can wrap up our observation cycles. And that's, like I said, it's all local control. By March, I would think depending when you start, by March, that's 3/4. That should probably give you enough time to show growth. And we're going to look at this also. It doesn't have to be like they went from novice mid to novice high, necessarily a full proficiency level. It's much, since you have the flexibility, you can lessen that if you need to. I'm doing credentialing evaluation. Who will determine what the period of showing growth will be, since the evaluator is not from the building? That you're going to have to, Melanie, you're going to have to ask your school about that one. I'll give you also, if there's some questions that I can't answer, keep them in the, I'm saving the chat box, and I will get with Catherine Everett Shaw. She's our OTES guru, and she helped me with this whole presentation. So I will ask her also. The district, the building, et cetera. So that's where we're talking about where the district determines how the teacher documents evidence. That's up to, it's like, for example, if you're in Westerville, does the Westerville School District determine it? Does Westerville North, does every high school have their own determination? Again, this gets back to local control. And so that's what, it really is on them. There's not really an answer to that, Beth, unfortunately. Alicia, is achievement defined as moving from one level to another from novice mid to novice high? No. Achievement is, for example, and this doesn't apply to us as much because of the whole, you have to show growth according to an achievement according to the proficiency levels. Achievement is like, say you did chapter 3 and it was on travel, and you did some whatever they learned from the beginning of chapter 3 to the end of chapter 3, and did they do well on that chapter 3 material? That's achievement, because there was a set amount right there that they had to do. Moving from novice mid to novice high is more of growth. And that is where, like, if you just gave them a test over one chapter, most kids are not going to move up a proficiency level. It's really going to take them probably at least a semester to get some clear growth. So novice mid to novice high is growing along the proficiency level. Achievement is when you just have like a unit and you're just testing them over that unit. I hope that makes sense. Oh, shared attribution, yes. Shared attribution, let me go back up here. Shared attribution was, there were some districts who just said, like, and it typically was, well, it could have been elementary or high school, where they said, okay, whatever the 10th grade ELA scores are, wherever the kids score on the state test for ELA, that is what everybody's teacher evaluation is based on. And so if you were in a very high performing district, that might have been nice, because it means, everybody got a great score. If you were in a more difficult, maybe a lower performing district, that might have been upsetting, because you're like, wait a minute, I teach Chinese. Why am I being evaluated based on math or something like that? So that's what shared attribution was. So if you had never, as a world language teacher in the last, what has been going on, 6 years, have never done an SLO, that means your district was probably on shared attribution. So you're sort of going to be new to this process because you've never really had to do it before. I hope that helps, Maria. Okay. All right. So that's sort of the differences between OTES 1.0 and OTES 2.0. All right. So now let's talk about the high quality student data for world languages. So, and this, and again, like I met with Catherine Everett Shaw at ODE. So I try to think of every question that, as a world language teacher, I remember hearing over the years. But like I said, if there's anything I can't answer, I will get an answer for you. So this is directly from the rubric. Like I mentioned, the rubric is in the OTES 2.0 folder, if you still have that one open. But one of the components of the rubric is the use of high quality student data. And you can see there's still the 4 levels: ineffective, developing, skilled, and accomplished. The one thing that we wanted to point out is skilled. I know all of us as teachers were like, I want to be accomplished. I want to be the highest level on the rubric. The one thing that Catherine was telling me to make sure to point out to the teachers is that skilled is excellent. It means you are rock solid, great teacher. So she's like, I think some teachers think that being skilled is like sort of bad, is like a B or whatever. And she's like, make sure that they know skilled is the goal, is the goal that you're trying to go for at a minimum. But accomplished then goes beyond that. So we just wanted to reassure that being skilled is not bad. Okay, so when you're looking at the high quality student data, the rubric says, well, let me let you go ahead and read it for a second. You don't need me to read it to you. Make that a little bigger for you. Okay, so like I mentioned before, the difference before was just I got the data, and if the kids met their goal, it looked great on my evaluation. If the kids didn't meet their goal, it looked awful on my evaluation, which just didn't work right. So now it has changed to now I get the data from at least two sources, which we were talking about, and I use the data, I analyze it, I reflect on it, and I use it to inform my practice. I use it to set the goals, and I use it to monitor the goals for my students. And I'll get a little more specific down below. Okay, and then accomplished, you can go beyond that. But basically, to meet the skilled is you have the two sources of data, and it's not just that you gather the data, it's what you do with the data is now what you're evaluated on, which I think as teachers is sort of what we do anyway. I get data and the kids take a test. I look at it and I'm like, ooh, they missed this, or they're really good at this. What am I going to do next as a teacher? That's exactly what's being evaluated now, which I think is definitely more appropriate for what we do as teachers. Okay, so let's go into, there's some guiding questions as they were developing this whole framework and getting input from teachers and administrators, et cetera, around the high quality student data. And I'm just going to call it HQSD because it's easier than saying high quality student data over and over. So one of the questions is first as a world language teacher is to say, what is, well, the high quality student data has to be aligned to the standards. So the first thing is, what is useful data to gather that will show the strengths and weaknesses of all the students and of individual students. Okay, so we know we're focusing on proficiency levels, the 4 skills, cultural competence. So what kind of data will give me that information, and which typically tends to be some sort of performance-based assessment. And it could be just like a reading assessment. It could be all 4 skills. It could be a whole unit assessment, et cetera. So that's the first thing is you want to make sure that you're getting useful data. And like I said, those of you who have been doing SLOs for years and have been doing the pre-assessment using an integrated or some sort of performance assessment, this is nothing really is changing for us, except I think it's actually getting a little bit easier because you don't have to go through the SLO framework to fill out. So that's the first thing is what's useful data to actually gather, and that's high quality. The second part that you need to reflect on, because this is all part of the evaluation, is how did the teacher analyze, reflect on, and make instructional decisions for the rest of the year using this data? So that's part of what's in the rubric. It's like, okay, you got this data. What did you actually do with it? That's what you want to think about and be able to, when you're having your conferences, et cetera. And then the other one, another part of the rubric is how did the data help the teacher impact student learning? So it's sort of like, what's good data to get? What am I going to do with this data? And then what's the evidence that the changes I made based on the data actually impacted the kids? Okay. So when you get into the, how do I actually gather the data? Like I said, a lot of having worked with, hundreds or thousands of you over the last 5 or 6 years with this, I think the majority of you are probably like, okay, whew, I'm already doing this. I don't have to change a whole lot. So the student data tool, it has 2 sets of criteria. So the first set of criteria focuses on the actual instrument. So the assessment or the portfolio or whatever you're using to do it. And we'll talk about that in a second. And then the second set of criteria talks about your use of the data. So it's sort of those 2 questions up here. What's the data? What am I going to do with the data? And then how do I have evidence that the data actually changed student learning or impacted it? Okay. So and this is directly, like I said, this is up in this folder. You'll see a document, I think it's called like HQSD something, and it lists these exact same things on here. But what I did is I took what's on the page that outlined it, and then I put some specific things for world languages to help us out. So the part that's written in red is like the official document, and then all the bullets underneath is what I added to try and get it more aligned to world languages. Okay, so the first thing is the high quality student data instrument that you use has to have been rigorously reviewed by locally determined experts in the field to meet all of the following criteria. Okay, so the very first one is it has to align to the learning standards. And I know that Ryan and myself have already both gotten emails from teachers who said, my principal said to just give a multiple choice test, or they just said to do, this, or just give a chapter unit test, and that's all I have to do. It has to be aligned to the new standards. And if you haven't looked at the new standards yet, hopefully you have, we've done recordings of them, et cetera. But if you haven't looked at the 2020 standards that were released last March, everything is now aligned to proficiency levels. So whatever type of data you gather from your assessment or your portfolio or whatever you're going to use, the kids have to be scored with proficiency levels for the OTES 2.0 piece, because it has to be aligned to the standards. So if your principal's like, just give them a multiple choice test, just use a Scantron, or just use a chapter test, you need to explain to them, I can't, because that's not aligned to the standards and it's not giving me enough time to actually show growth, et cetera. Okay, so, and this is the second bullet is kind of nice, because before we were sort of limited to the, a performance assessment, but now, so you can do, again, has to be aligned to the standards, but you can give a performance assessment, you can do a portfolio if you prefer, you can do another summative assessment, maybe the kids do some sort of oral project, et cetera. The difference is or not even the difference is that you only have to show, or show growth for one or more targeted skills. You don't have to do it in all four. So maybe, maybe you just have given like a performance assessment, just a general one. And like I mentioned earlier, and you're like, oh yeah, they do really well with reading and listening. They're kind of really high on writing and they're really low on speaking or something. And so you determine, you know what, I think I'm going to focus on speaking, and because they're really good with speaking, or I'm going to focus on writing because they're really poor in writing, et cetera. So that's what's kind of nice to take some of the stress off, is you don't have to show growth in all four areas plus culture. You really just have to pick 2 skills. The other thing that's nice, and so you could do this with a portfolio. Like I said, if you determine that, it's really reading and speaking that I need to have, or signing that I really need to show growth with, then maybe you just do some performance assessments based on those 2 skills. You're going to have to do something, throughout to sort of see where they are with the 5 different skills. And Beth, who asked the question about the common assessments, that's where that could come into play, that if everybody coming into, French 3 took a common assessment in French 2, that will give you a good idea of what are all the strengths and the weaknesses of the students. So that could help you. You'd probably want to do some of your own, at least, some other things in the beginning, just, because kids had the whole summer. And last year on top of it was just, last year, or this year, I should say, it's not done yet, craziness might affect that too. So, but that's the big thing to focus on, is that you no longer have to show growth across all 4 skills and culture. Just pick 2 areas to show growth. Let's see. Okay. So, and if you say I know a lot of districts are doing the syllabi literacy. A lot of districts have started using like the Apple or the Stamp or some of those other, standardized tests on the syllabi literacy. Some districts I know are like, oh, we give it in level 2 and we give it in level 4 or every year to see where the kids are. You could use one of those tests if you want to. You could use the Apple, you could use the Stamp. I mean, you have to pay for it, so that's obviously the issue. But if you're like, we give the Apple at the end of level 2, and then we give the Apple at the end of level 3, you could use those tests and then pick 2 skills within there, and those could be your data points. If you can't like give the Apple as your first test and then do your own test as the second data point, you'd have to do the same test twice, because otherwise they're being evaluated by 2 different people. So if you're going to use like the Apple or the Stamp, we'd have to talk. I think I'm going to look into that one a little bit more, because some teachers may be like, well, we just give it at the end of the year of level 3. So I'm going to have to look in that one a little bit more. But the reason I pointed this out is because on the full, like the general OTES, it says you can only use vendor approved assessments, and they give you a list of vendor approved assessments. and none of our world language tests are on there. But you can also use other vendor tests as long as your district's okay with it. That's why I put this link to the Seal of Literacy, because we have so many tests on there that are already approved for the Seal of Literacy. So that's a legitimate bank of tests that you could also choose from. The Apple and the Stamp obviously being the most common and the ones that are most affordable for kids and teachers. And they're really, the Apple and the Stamp are the two that are really made for K-12 kids. So if you look at that and the principal's like, wait, that's not a vendor approved test, it doesn't have to necessarily be on the list as long as your district says it's okay. And like I said, if you show them that it's on the Seal of Literacy page as an approved test, that's probably all you're going to need. All right, the last thing so you have to have some sort of assessment that's aligned to the standards, is that a grammar-based or multiple choice assessment isn't going to provide high quality student data. It doesn't mean you can't, if you're given those tests, you can give those tests, we can't tell you how to test, but they're not going to work for your OTES evaluation, just because the data they provide, especially the grammar, is not aligned to standards or proficiency. Now, I do want to note that a lot of times, because even like with the AP, et cetera, the interpreter, and I think even the Stamp and the Apple, the interpretive reading, viewing, or listening, those could be multiple choice if you're truly assessing deeper comprehension that's aligned to the standards. Oops, sorry, I got a little typo here. So I put the link to that Appendix D template in there. I put a couple of sample assessments in there where it's more than just like, what year was the child born, or what color clothes is he wearing, or something like that. But it's really aligned to the interpretive standards, the literacy standards, the communication, the culture that they're getting, keywords, what's the main idea, they're doing cultural comparisons, et cetera. So if you do use multiple choice, again, it's pretty much going to be limited to the interpretive piece. You can't use multiple choice for speaking or conversation or writing or signing, because how could that be multiple choice if you're presenting information? And some teachers have said that, again, have emailed Ryan and me about, well, they said to just use multiple choice for everything. And they, again, in addition to not being aligned to the standards, the two skills for speaking, or the presentational and interpersonal skills, cannot be assessed with multiple choice. That'd be like saying, I'm going to give you a multiple choice test on how well you play the violin. It doesn't make any sense. Okay, the second thing that the assessment has to do is it has to measure what's intended to be measured. Okay, so if we're aligned to the standards, as I just have been mentioning, so you've got to hit the 3 modes of communication: speaking, writing, listening, viewing, signing, or intercultural communication, understanding, competence. So if the assessment you're giving is measuring these components, the way they're described in the new standards, then you're fine. This has to be attributable to the specific teacher for the courses and grade levels taught. So that means that the evidence must be for new learning for this school year. So if you spend the whole first quarter reviewing material that they learned last year, that is not going to count. That doesn't count as high quality student data, because it's something that they've already learned. If you're teaching new material, first semester, and you're sort of throwing, because we always have to review old material. So you're using some old material, but you're also using new material, which is a much more efficient way to do it, then yes, that is fine to do. Okay, this is really, again, doesn't really apply to us as much as the teachers who had shared attribution. And that's what this is talking about. In shared attribution, you were getting evaluated on something that somebody else taught. That is no longer allowed by law. It has to be what you taught this year. Okay, and then the last piece for the assessment. So it has to demonstrate evidence of student learning, achievement, or growth. We mentioned what that was earlier. You have to follow the protocols for administration scoring. So, I did the test, I use the rubric, et cetera. Is it trustworthy results? Which again, if you're following these pieces up here, you will get trustworthy results, and it shouldn't be driven by bias or be offensive. So I think we all know with the new, there's a lot of, we really want to make sure that we're doing equity and culturally responsive teaching. So we want to make sure there's no bias, et cetera, in it. So some help for this is the ODE proficiency rubrics. I know a lot of you use those or have made sort of rubrics that are similar to them. So those rubrics are aligned to the standards. They hit novice, mid through advanced low. They hit the 4 skills, the 3 modes, culture, et cetera. Those would be an appropriate tool to, if you're giving an assessment, to use to gather the data. okay? Because you are getting data that's aligned to the standards on a proficiency-based rubric. There's really no other way to get to assess a proficiency level unless you're using a rubric of some sort. So when you go to this page, you'll see we have the rubrics for the presentational and the interpersonal, and then you'll also see on there where I mentioned earlier, the ACTFL Appendix D template, which comes with its own rubric. So anything on the rubric page, if you're using that to score your assessment, that is a high quality instrument that is giving you data that's aligned to the standard. So if you're using the rubrics from ODE, and I'm saying you have to, I can't tell you you have to, but if you're looking for a rubric, you're like, I've never had to do this before, the rubrics are there. They're, you know, we want you to use them if at all possible. Now, the other thing that we have in the rubrics that's very helpful when we wrote them is that we broke down the proficiency levels. So instead of just being novice mid, novice high, et cetera, each proficiency level starting, and it starts with novice mid because novice low is pretty hard to break down because it's pretty minimal what they know. Is that we've also broken it down into like novice high 1, 2, or 3. And let me click on the rubric really quickly and open those. So those of you who have not seen them can see what I'm talking about. So when you're on the rubrics page, scroll down, or there's a link to click on, and you'll see on here the different rubrics. So for example, when you go, I'll just open novice high because that's a typical one. When you look at the rubrics, there's actually 2 different versions. There's a single point rubric, which is really nice for the kids because it just gives, you know, they can list their strengths, they can list their goals, et cetera. But the other nice things about this rubric is that it gives you this 1, 2, and 3. So if a student is coming in at novice high 1, that means they're almost novice high, but they're not quite there. Novice high 2, they meet novice high, they're really good. Novice high 3, maybe they're not quite up to intermediate low, but they're inching towards intermediate low. So these rubrics are nice because they have the student, the single point rubric for the kids, but they also have the full rubric for the teachers. So you can see, okay, what exactly is a novice high have to do? And again, this is aligned to the standard. So you can say, oh, this is, and these are written for assessment. So they include a little bit more than a typical rubric would. So it talks about, you know, what do they do with pronunciation? What do they do with word order? What do they do with audience interest? What do they do with intercultural competence? So that's the other advantage of if you're using the ODE rubrics is that, remember when I was saying about how you have to set the goals for the kids? Because, you know, it's easy for a student to go from novice mid to novice high. It's much more difficult for a level 2 student to go from novice high to intermediate low. It's a much bigger jump. And so what's nice on this is you may say, you know what, my kids, you know, my students are coming in, you know, whatever the individual or the group or whatever at novice high 1 and level 2. My goal is to try to get them to novice high 3 or intermediate low 1. So that's what I was talking about before, where someone who made the comment about they want the results by March because they want to get the whole process over with. You may not be able to go, say you're doing level 2 or even level 3, which is even tougher. Your kids may not be able to go from intermediate low to intermediate mid by March. They may, or they may not. So all of the ODE rubrics have this 1, 2, 3 breakdown. So you have some flexibility in what you're setting for your goal. So your goal may be by the end of the year, they hit intermediate low, but by low, you know, 1 or whatever, but by the 3rd semester in March, your goal may only be that they hit novice high 3. Okay, so that's that, like I said, so those are there if you want to use them. And the rubrics could be used, and someone asked, are these K-12? Yes, they're K-12. The rubrics could be used for performance assessments. If you do portfolios, you could use the rubrics for, you know, if you're like, I'm doing a portfolio, I'm going to do a writing and a speaking portfolio using, you know, there's so many platforms out there now after this past year. I think everyone's been pretty good with this digital portfolios. So you could use the rubrics also for, you know, to assess the reading and the writing or speaking in a portfolio or any other type of a summative assessment. Maybe you've determined, okay, we're going to do speaking is one of their goals. So they're going to do an oral presentation. So I'm just going to use the speaking rubric or the presentational rubric for the summative assessment. So again, I'm not saying you have to use the ODE rubrics, but I want to let you know that they're there because it can make the whole process a lot easier, at least for this component, for the OTES, because it already is aligned to the standards. It's already been reviewed by outside experts. It's already given you high quality student data. There are other proficiency rubrics out there. ACTFL has rubrics. I know, who is it? A couple other states have proficiency rubrics. You are not limited to only using the ODE rubrics. If there's other ones that have been created by experts in the field that you really like and that you're in the habit of using, you can use those too. As long as they're showing proficiency levels aligned to, well, the standards, which are proficiency levels, you're good to go with those. Okay. So that was what happens with the actual tool. So basically it has to be aligned to the standards, which means it has to give results in proficiency levels, basically. All right. And then the second thing, as I talked about, was that it reflects what does the teacher do with the data? Okay. So this is also right from the OTES 2.0 page. And I just put it with the red part is from OTES 2.0, and then the little bubbles underneath are what I put in for extra for world languages. Okay, so the teacher must use the data generated from the high quality student data tool or must use it by accurately reflecting, analyzing the data, using the information as part of an ongoing cycle of support for student learning, which is basically what we do. Like you get the data, whether it's the test results or whatever you use, the rubric results, and then how do you intentionally use that data to drive your instruction and impact student learning? So that's what a teacher does. So there's not this, that's the nice thing about this is it's not like, oh my gosh, this is one more thing I have to do. This is stuff that we already do, any teacher already does. Now you just have to, and you get evidence for it anyway, but now you just have to get the evidence in a way that you can show it and explain it to your evaluator, whether that's your principal, whomever, for your evaluation. So this is not adding anything to what you do. It's just making you have to basically show someone else what you're doing. Okay, so that's the first thing. The second thing this teacher has to do is consider the student learning needs and styles, identify the strengths and the weaknesses of an entire class as well as individual students. So again, that's what we do as teachers, but there's a couple different things that have changed from last time. And this is where the district is going to have to determine what, how I mentioned earlier, it shows growth for most of the students in the district or the school or whatever. You want to know what that means. Does that mean, like I said, 51%? Does that mean 99% of the kids? So the district's going to, or your building or principal or whomever is going to have to, you need to know how much that amount is. Okay, so what you can do though is you can determine the groups on which you will focus based on what the district says. So what's nice about this is you could choose a small group and a large group or just a large group. And I gave a couple examples of what it could be. So say you have like a small AP class and that, you've done some pre-assessing, they did a writing activity, they did you did an IPA and whatever you want to do, you did some pre-assessment in a small AP class. And you notice that the kids have really, really good writing skills, intermediate, mid to high. And you're thinking, oh, I'd really like to get them to the seal by literacy or something like that. So what you need to determine from the data is say, okay, one of my goals is that I'm going to plan instruction to help my students move to the next proficiency level in writing. They're really strong writers. I really think I can get them up to a full proficiency level in writing. So it's no longer that you necessarily pick like the students who score the lowest because they show the most growth. That doesn't have to be the case anymore. It's really, we don't want to ignore the gifted kids, and we also don't want to ignore the typical or the kids who might be a little bit lower achieving. We want to make sure that we're helping everybody grow. So you may say, one of my targets is going to be, the goal is to get my German AP kids to, a full proficiency level higher in writing because they're already really good at it. Another goal could be that you have 3 large classes of Spanish 2 or French 2 or Chinese, Japanese, ASL, whatever you have. And so you do some pre-assessment, whether it's a full IPA, whether it's some individual assessments, et cetera, and that you see that listening is an area of weakness for most of the students in your Spanish 2 class. So they're scoring novice low to mid. And you were hoping they'd be a little bit higher. So your goal is like, okay, I got this data. What am I going to do with my instruction to help my students move? And maybe you're not going to have them move a full proficiency level because if they're already sort of weak in it, it may be too much to ask them to go all the way up to novice high, which is the goal for level 2 typically. So you may say, my goal is to help each student move 2 to 3 numbers on the rubric. So remember how we had like, maybe they're coming in at a novice mid 1, I'm gonna try and get them to a novice mid 3, or I'm gonna try and get them to a novice high 1, Okay, maybe there's kids who are, they're coming in at a novice low, a novice low, and you're like, my goal is just to give them to a novice mid 2 or something like that. So this is what's really nice, is that you get the data, and now the goal, you set your goal based on what does the data tell me, and what am I going to do as the teacher to help the student grow. So the whole focus has changed from student growth to teacher growth in the OTES 2.0, which is how it should be. The kids shouldn't be responsible for your evaluation. That's too much pressure on everybody. The other thing is, now say you have the same group of Spanish 2 students, so you got 3 large classes, so you're like, okay, that's going to be most of my kids anyway, so I'm going to do that. But then maybe you have, within that same group of Spanish 2 students, maybe you have a group of heritage speakers who have really strong speaking skills. You know how a lot of times they come in and they're like intermediate, mid, or high in level 2, and you're like, what do I do with them? So you may decide that's going to be one of my other goals, is for this group of 5 or 6 heritage kids, I'm going to plan instruction to help these students move a full proficiency level in speaking. It's already an area of strength, so I think I can get them up to another proficiency level. Or like I said, the other option is you take an area where the kids might be a little bit weaker and say, I might be able to realistically get them a full proficiency level. Maybe I can only get them a couple numbers on the rubric. The other thing that's nice this year, or in this upcoming fall, with the first time for OTES 2.0, is this piece of it, of the growth and the evidence for it, because of last year with that, or I keep saying last year, it's not over yet. This year with COVID and everything, as we all know, everything's just been in such an upheaval. This part, the evidence piece, does not count on next year's. So they can't say like, you have to meet these growth targets. So next year is a perfect time to say, okay, I think this is what I'm going to be able to do for heritage speakers. I think this is what I'm going to do for kids who are weaker in this area, and then see where they do end up, how accurate, where you're like, oh man, they went way farther than I thought they could, or, ooh, no, I really set this too high and the kids really aren't able to do it, which is still neither good nor bad. It's just, okay, it is what it is. So use the upcoming year as sort of the stress-free year to sort of play with how can I set my goals? What are some targets that I can use with the assessments? Because this upcoming year, that the data, like the growth piece, isn't included in the evaluation anyway, just because of COVID. That's sort of, I think it was a 1-year thing. Okay, the teacher also needs to, so that's the next thing. I get the data, I analyze the data, I use the data to inform my instruction. I adapt my instruction. So all my kids have needs, whether it's individuals, whether it's the whole class or whatever. What am I doing? How am I going to adapt my instruction based on the data to help the kids grow and meet their needs? So again, that's what we do. That's what teachers do. And then the final piece is that you actually have to measure the student learning and the progress they're making, achievement or growth. Like I said, achievement's a little rough for us because it's hard to move up a level with just a unit test. So go back to see part 1 again for measuring. That's the whole thing I talked about with the rubrics, et cetera. And then again, your district has to determine what evidence do you have to provide to show growth. Are they happy, with the districts or your principal or whoever's going to do it, say, do we just need to show you our grade book? Do we need to have a spreadsheet? So that, again, it's no longer that you have to do it in the SLO. The district will, or your principal, whoever, will tell you how you have to show the evidence, because that's part of the rubric. And again, it's not going to, they still may have you do it this year, but it's not going to count for anything. But it's a good sort of dry run, I think, for districts to say what's going to be the most efficient and accurate way for the teachers to show that they had growth. And so that's this part of the rubric right here, the part that I have circled, that's the skilled. So the teacher uses at least 2 sources to demonstrate growth, shows clear evidence of the growth to meet what they needed to meet. This is the piece that's in the rubric, but that doesn't count next year in the evaluation. That they may still ask you to do it, but it's not going to be part of your rubric evaluation. Okay, I'm going to stop there and look at questions, because that's all I have, like information wise, but I want to look at questions and see what we have over here, and then I'll show you some other stuff. Like I said, I reserved this till 5 because I thought it might take longer, but if you have to use, again, sorry, if you have to leave, just go ahead and leave. Okay, so let me get back to where were we? Achievement, shared attribution, the district. So few administrators understand and work. I'm worried they will try to force us into a generalized format that doesn't fit us. Again, as always, you are free to call me. Beth, actually, I had offered in your district to come out and do some OTES, so that may help. But again, I think if you show them this document, let me go into the folder and show you this right here. This one right here, if you can see on my screen where it says high quality student district guidance tool for all content areas. when you pull this up, and this is exactly what I had just spread out on there, it says right here, the high quality student data instrument has to align to the standards. If you show them our standards and say they have to write and speak and read and listen and sign, and this format doesn't work for us, it's right in here that it has to align to the standards and measure what's intended to be measured. As always, if you have trouble with that, Beth or anyone, feel free to email me or have your administrator email me, and I'm happy to explain to them what's going on. But this is key right here, is it has to align to the standards. And whereas the standards last time were more still in the grade bands, they are complete proficiency levels. There's no way around having to assess to proficiency levels. Okay, let me see here. Hates common assessments. All right, if we teach multiple levels, can it be the same skill but for different levels? Or does it have to be 2 different skills? No, this is where in D it's much more flexible. So because you may not need it. So you may say that my level 2 kids, really having some trouble listening, especially with authentic resources. I'm really going to focus on listening for my level 2 kids. But like I said, my level 4 kids are just fantastic writers. I want to get them to be better writers. So yeah, you can, it's however you want. It's very flexible. All right, Sarah, do we have to use 2 different instruments? Can we do pre and post in a portfolio both? Yes, exactly. Yeah, you could do that. And that's why I was saying, like, if you did the portfolio, you could get 2 different pieces of data from that aligned to the standards, because you've got all the skills, you've got culture, whatever else is in there. Or Sarah, am I understanding your question correctly? Maybe I'm not understanding. You want to jump on Sarah McCrae and ask her question? Maybe I'm not understanding it. Sarah's still in here.
Yes. So I am just wondering, so we have to use 2 forms of high quality data. Does that mean that it has to be graded with 2 separate rubrics, or does it have to just be shown in 2 separate formats? For instance, an IPA plus the year-long portfolio, both graded with the ODE rubrics, or do we have to grade with the ODE rubric plus a different kind of rubric?
Oh, no, you could use the ODE rubrics for everything. Yeah.
Okay, it just has to be in 2 different formats. And
but you did that's why I was saying that you could do both a pre-post assessment and a portfolio, or you could just do one or the other and pull out 2 different areas out of it. It depends. It's really open to you. You could do it either way.
Okay, and I do have another question.
Yeah, go ahead.
So this rubric, this is for the entire year and not just for one observation, correct?
The OTES rubric, you mean?
Yes.
Yes, it is. And if you go back that folder, did I pull it up? There you go. I have 2 computers. My other computer is going to die, so hopefully this one stays with me. If you go in, where's the one I wanted to show you? Oh, this one right here, where it says the OTES 2.0 main page with all information. That I put the link on there, but it's also, if you just go to the ODE site and type OTES 2.0, it gives you everything. This first one, this voiceover PowerPoint, is excellent because you don't have to necessarily listen to it. She voiced it over, but Catherine also put all the notes in the PowerPoint. I would recommend, for all those details about the bigger things that are not world language specific, this would be my first suggestion. Go to this PowerPoint. I was looking at it last night and it's excellent. I think I might have even uploaded it in there, but that answers questions about the time period. And then what you were asking about the rubric. Yes, the rubric is for the whole year.
Oh, okay. Okay, yeah. Perfect.
Because they changed the format of, here it is right here. Let me pull this up real quick. And like I said, this gets a little bit more in the weeds for me and a little bit out of my wheelhouse, but there was, what was that thing I wanted to show you? Hang on a second, that's not the one I wanted. Oh, here it is, the OTES 2.0 framework, the second bullet on here. Okay. So this shows you like all the different components about, there's where you have to have a holistic observation, walkthroughs, a formal focus observation, and then a summative conference.
Okay.
That help?
Yeah, the only reason I asked was I was just wondering if we're supposed to have, like, we could do a pre-test, but say we wanted to do a portfolio, how for our first observation, if it's the beginning of the year, are the kids going to have that second data point. Does that make sense? So we have to have two.
Right. The second data point is going to come after that instructional period of time. Do you know what I mean? And
I understand.
Yeah. And if you look at the rubric, the other thing on the rubric, let me pull the rubric up really fast so you can, because I put a few things in there, but here it is. The rubric has a lot of different, like the high quality student data, like I said, is in law. I think this is the year that they can't count it this year, but that will always be in there. But some of the other components of the rubric, Catherine was actually just telling us in our meeting this morning, the district doesn't have to necessarily evaluate you on every single piece of the rubric. Now the district can choose to, so you can't say, well, the OTE said you don't have to. The district chooses what they want to do. So if the district says we're going to evaluate you on every section, then they can. The evidence and the high quality student data, they have to, because that's part of the law. So
right.
Yeah, so if you look in the rubric here, it'll give you a better idea of what they should be looking for when they come in.
Okay.
All right. Yeah. If you have more questions, shoot me an email. And I didn't even put my email there. Ryan, if Ryan is still on, Ryan, can you throw my email in there in the chat box? Okay. Let me see. So let me get where we were. Megan Brady, is this required for all courses I were teaching? I have 4 PEPs. Do I assess all 4? Where was that? Do I assess all 4 classes and 2 skills? Okay, Megan, that's where it gets back to that. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Or no, actually, I'll keep it on for now. I'm gonna get back to my document. Okay, Megan, that's where it gets into what your district says means most of the students. If they say you have to assess 90% of your students, you don't necessarily have to do 2 skills for every class. No, as long as overall you have assessed, if they say you got to assess 90% of your students and show growth or whatever, then that's where you may say, okay, I'm going to do the reading for my level. Oh, you have 4 preps. So you don't have to do 2 skills in every single level, but you just have to have 2 measurements overall. Does that make sense? But you need to find out from your principal what does most of it mean? If he says you got to do all your kids, then you may say, okay, I'm going to do reading with my level 1 and 2 kids, and I'm going to do writing with my level 3 and 4 kids, or you might do more. I'm not sure if I answered that correctly or not. I mean, if I answered that, Megan, does that answer what you need?
Yep. That makes sense.
Cool. Okay, good. All right. So if I use IPAs I create myself, I can still use those, or do I have to go and find? No, Beth. No, you do not have to. So if you've been using IPAs all along and they're aligned, the best way to check if your IPA is high quality is to look at the ODE rubrics. Even if you're not going to use the ODE rubrics, that's okay, to look at our world language rubrics. And if that rubric can score your IPA, if all the components of the rubric are found within your IPA, then your IPA is fine. You do not have to use a vendor created test. If you're like, I don't want to mess with this, I want to use the apple or the stamp, you're welcome to do that. So yeah, those of you who have been doing IPAs and performance assessments for a while, this, like I said, this isn't really changing anything. But again, just double check that your IPA is really aligned to the standards or to whatever you're scoring. Beth, great question. I'm thinking this could actually be a valuable thing for a test to assess our work across levels. How are the kids in our curricula actually working for them? Do I need to answer that, Beth? Or you? Is that a question for me, Beth?
No, not anymore.
Not anymore. Got it. Okay. Zach.
Just a comment.
Okay, something we're going to try is student portfolios take care with them across levels. Right, exactly. And that'd be a great way to, and the thing is, if everybody had these portfolios, Zach, that portfolio could at least give you a start, in the beginning of the next, like in whatever language you teach, Spanish 3, about like, okay, let me sort of get a feel for where they are. Okay, it looks like we might have to do some work on this. It gives you a little bit more information about where to start determining where their growth might need to be. Yeah, summative assessment. There we go, Beth. Okay, Susan Schilling, Beth, you can use IPAs. Okay, except this year. Thank you, Susan. Does a reading or video need to be an authentic material? Yes, because in the standards are what kids can do with interpretive reading, listening, or viewing with authentic materials. Doesn't mean you can't use textbooks or readers or whatever you're using outside, to help the kids prep. But the ultimate goal, whether it's for OTES or for the kids within the course, is that eventually you want them to be able to access authentic material, because that's what they're going to do when they leave our class. They're not going to have a leveled reader or have a textbook. They're going to be doing authentic materials. So you can use all sorts of authentic, or I don't want to say inauthentic, teacher created or readers or authentic materials, anything you want when you're teaching. But for the OTES to be aligned to the standards, yes, it has to be some sort of authentic resource. All right, Christina, aren't they K-12? Oh yeah, answer that. So if I have level 2 and 3, I get to pick which level I want to assess and use data with. I don't have to. And so again, Shelley, that's sort of what Megan's question was. It depends on how many students your school says you have to assess. If they say you have to assess at least 80% of your kids, then you're going to have to figure out, how do I assess 80% of my kids? So there's not a simple answer to that. It really depends on your district. If your district's like you got to assess 50% of your kids, then you just choose whatever hits 50%. So if we only teach level 1 novices and there's no common assessments for either firstborn, would be advisable to begin the year with a pre-assessment. All right, let's think about level 1. I was thinking about this actually today and didn't have enough time to think about that as much as I want. Level 1 is very easy to show growth. I mean, a pre-assessment, if you want to, I mean, you pretty much, I almost feel like with the level 1s, because if you say, well, I'm going to have them grow in writing and reading, but you have no idea how good of writer or readers they are to start with. Like before with the old SLOs, it was like, yes, assess them day 1 because there's no way for them to go but up. I'm almost feeling with the level 1s, if maybe you give yourself a little bit of time where you sort of do a little bit of reading, writing, speaking, listening, and see what maybe is working and not working. Like you're like, oh, these kids are really good with listening, but oh my gosh, they can't, it's in French and they can't spell anything because the accents are just killing them, or the spelling is just killing them. So Suzanne, you could do it either way. You could, if you do a pre-assessment, I mean, it basically is going to show nothing unless you have kids who have already had the language. Or you could say, I'm going to wait a month, and again, you got to talk to your administrator, because if they're like, we want the results by this and this time, you're going to have to determine how realistic is it for me to get to a specific level. This would be, if you know this is going to be happening next year and could probably be happening in the future, I would use this year to sort of play around a little bit and say, I'm going to try this and see if I wait a month and then sort of pick 2 skills after that first month, do I have enough time to get their growth by whenever I have to turn this in? So you could do it either way, but I think with the pressure off of just giving them assessment that shows that they know nothing, which is kind of a waste of everyone's time, you might want to say, I can actually breathe a little bit and give myself some actual idea of where they are. Okay, I hope that answered that, Suzanne. I like the idea of the students having individual portfolios. Yep, not a problem. That's nice because we really didn't have that before. Cool, gracias. Thank you, very informative. My pleasure. So if I have 2 areas, do I have to use all 4 Spanish? Again, we're right back to, I would say if you're doing speaking and writing, and you want to do it on all the class, well, again, it gets down to how many kids do you have to assess, because you may have 4 Spanish 2 classes and 2 of them may be just fantastic in everything. So you may say, you know what, the 2 classes that are really good, I'm really going to push them higher with something they're really good at. The other 2, they're really struggling with reading. I'm just going to do reading with those 2. So again, it gets down to how many students does this, what means most students in my district. And again, maybe you don't want to only focus on speaking and writing. Maybe you want to do speaking with 1 class and, or let's see, how would I do that? Yeah, maybe you want to do speaking on 1 class and writing with the other, or you have different skills that you want to take. All right, when were we able to access the document? Oh, Nadine, could you throw the link in there for this URL? It's all, Lindsay, it's all, it's in a Google Drive. You just have to download it because I have it view only. Certificates from Bernice. I'm confused as to the goals of focus versus data points. How many of each do you need? So, okay. The focus, that focus word is coming from, and I'm on Lisa Fetterman's question. The focus is when you do your professional growth plan, which I had linked in here. Is my screen still showing, Nadine? I can't see. Is the document still showing? I lost my second computer.
Yes, it is.
Okay, cool.
Yes.
Thank you. Where was that? There it is. So up here where it talks about where you have your professional growth plan, that's where you establish areas of focus with your principal. You're like, okay, after looking back on this year, I really want to focus on more like building community in my class, or a more culturally responsive climate or something like that. So that's the focus piece. The data piece is those assessments where you're figuring out the kids' proficiency levels and did they grow. So when you have your final conference, what should be going on with the evaluator is he should be talking to you about your professional growth plan, which is just your overall behaviors, like running the classroom. Maybe classroom management was an issue. The data points are the 2, like the high quality student data from the kids. All of that should be part of the discussion. So it's actually 2 different things. So I apologize if I was confused you on that. But the goals could also be, like I mentioned earlier, in my AP class, I really want to try and get, my goal is to get the kids all up one full proficiency level. So that's like one of your data goals, whereas the focus is, I really want to build a classroom that has a better cultural climate or something like that. Hopefully that helps. Ryan Wirtz. Oh, thanks, Ryan. Let me keep going. And like I said, if you have to go, I know it's a long day, feel free to go. I teach German. I developed a pre-POTES with rubric for interpretive communication, interpersonal communication. Oops. Being able to define what's your name, etc. Would this be two appropriate pieces of HQSD? Oh, is that kindergarten German? I'm sorry, I missed that part. Is that kindergarten, Melanie?
Yes, it is.
Yes. That's more than appropriate for kindergartners. Yeah. And you may set yours up with like can-do statements. We always find it's nice to, like, I can tell my name. I can answer when somebody asks my name. Look at, in the standards, we have that K6 version that has a lot of elementary examples. So
okay.
So if you can look in the standards under elementary, and yes.
Okay.
Kindergartners, yes, totally. At first I'm looking, I'm like, well, you might want to do more, but I'm like, wait, these kids are 5.
Okay, sure. Yes, thank you.
Yep. Okay. So Marie, I never did a portfolio. Can you please give me ideas on how to do one? That may, you know what, Marie, I can't answer right now if someone wants to share one, but I'm going to save this chat and I'm going to see if maybe we can do a workshop on that, because that's a really good idea. Melanie, does it have to be tied to the observed lessons? Not necessarily, no. Because I showed you that rubric, and the rubric is he's looking at all sorts of things. Now, and you should have a pre-conference before he comes in anyway, and you could say, hey, and if he's like, hey, I'm coming in, then you may want to tie it to it. You may be like, well, we're working on listening, so when you come in, I'm going to do some listening activities. But sometimes they just pop in, and you don't know when they're coming, and so you wouldn't necessarily have it tied to it. So I think that would be something to discuss with your principal or the evaluator.
Okay, thank you. Thanks.
Yep. Zach, goal setting, self-reflections. If one of the interpersonal communications is being able to greet, ask how one is doing, and leave, they can record that with a part is being able to greet, ask how do, leave, take. Zach. So Zach, are you asking me or are you commenting on somebody's thing?
That was in reference to Marie's question about like doing a portfolio.
Got it.
She didn't have ideas on it, so I was responding to her.
Cool, got it. Certificates, workshop on portfolios. I would definitely appreciate it. Okay, yeah, I'm definitely gonna. And if anybody like does portfolios and wants to lead a workshop on here, just let me know. I will be happy to let you run it. I see a lot of people saying I'd like a workshop. If anyone wants to say I'd love to lead a workshop, okay, that's what I put in my Google Form suggestion for future meetups. Okay, I think I got all the questions. Did anybody else have? I'm gonna stop sharing for a second here. Or actually, does anybody else have questions? Otherwise, I'm going to show you. We have like 4 minutes. I'll just show you what else is in the folder. It looks like I got them all. Okay, really quickly, when you're in that OTES 2.0 folder, I just put 2 samples in there of a vacation assessment and one in French. Well, it's French, but you can read it, and English. One for English. The reason I put these in here is it gives you an idea. If you decide that I want to like just focus on reading, it gives you an idea of what a good standards-based interpretive reading would look like. Like a lot of you have seen these because I've used them in other workshops, like this one on Disneyland Paris gives you an idea of what an interpretive reading could look like if that's what all you want to focus on. If all you want to do is an interpretive listening, here's some ideas. If you want to do a speaking, etc. So I just put 2 assessments in there. And like I said, most of you I've worked with, like I said, we've worked together for so many years that a lot of you, you're like, I got this proficiency thing inside out. So the good thing now is that you can pick a part of an IPA and use that as just its own assessment if you want to standalone, or you can just pull that from the IPA for the high quality student data. Okay, it is 3 minutes till 5. Are there other questions or? And I'll do more. I'm going to do more of these throughout the summer. I mean, it'll probably be the same as what I did with you. It might get tweaked a little bit, but so if some of your friends missed it, we'll do other ones. I recorded this one, I hope. How classical teachers use the rubric magistra. Let me talk to my Latin teachers because I've got, it was unfortunate because I did this huge Latin teacher meetup in Columbus the day before schools closed for the pandemic. And so we never got to follow up. We had like 30 some Latin teachers. It was amazing. And then we never got to follow up. So I'll look at that and talk to my Latin teacher, see if anybody's doing anything. How do you do an IPA for writing? So the IPA, Marie, were you the kindergarten teacher? No, that was.
No, that's not me.
That was Melanie. Okay. Yeah. An IPA for writing. Well, an IPA would have reading, writing, speaking, listening. You would just do like a performance-based writing. So it may be something, if you look at the two examples I just showed, look at the writing, the presentational writing sections in there. So it may be something about where you say, hey, talk to me about your childhood. Tell me, just things you used to do, where you grew up, what did you like, et cetera. So it's just where you get some sort of general writing that's not script. It's not like, give me 5 of this and 4 of this and 3 of this, where you just say, tell me about this, give me 200 words. Look at the writing rubric, the presentational rubric that we have on that ODE page, and that will tell you all the things that need to be in a writing that you're assessing, and that'll sort of help you plan how to do it. Does that help? Yeah, Senora Thagard, is very overwhelming. It is and it isn't. Like if you're sort of like, I've been doing this all along in proficiency and I had to do SLOs, it's really not that different. I think it's actually less overwhelming than it used to be. If you've never had to do this and you're sort of new to this, then yes, it will be overwhelming, but you're welcome to contact me anytime and I am more than happy to help you with it. So I think it depends where you're coming from and what you had, what you had to do in your district in the past. Okay. Okay. Anything else? Or is this 459? Oh, the data collection is, well, but actually, if you think about it, data collection is, you give them the assessment, D, I'm looking at your question. And I mean, you score their results anyway in the grade book, right? I mean, so the difference is that you do need to have some sort of, whether it's a spreadsheet or if you're using Google Classroom or whatever, because I know grade books are points. So yeah, somewhere you're going to have to put what's the correlation between what proficiency level they are. Are we able to establish a way to share more approved lessons beyond the 2 samples? Yeah, and these aren't necessarily approved, they are just examples. In the model curriculum, there's like in the career connections part of the model curriculum, there's sample IPAs, there's a bunch of sample lessons in there. We're updating the model curriculum with a ton of new lessons, but unfortunately, again, with COVID, everything got put back. So the model curriculum won't be done until probably the winter or the spring. Let me see, Lisa Sheppard. Oh yeah, Lisa Sheppard, her stuff is amazing. If you go to Lisa Sheppard, I think it's Madame's Musings. She has tons and tons of IPAs. She's from Ohio. Everything's aligned to the standards. I would highly recommend, yes, go steal what you can from Lisa. And I know she would love you stealing from her. Okay, other questions, or I think we're losing people, so I think we're good. Oh, it's Bernice, I think it's called Madame's Musings. I think it's like Madame's Musings, and someone can correct me. I think that's what it's called, something like that. Okay, I do want to respect your time. It is 5 o'clock, so if there's no more questions. Oh, perfect, thanks, Megan. Madame Sheppard, there you go. I appreciate it. Feel free. I'll throw my email in here one more time. Yeah, feel free to email me if you have questions. I'm happy to help you out. I've got, Catherine Shaw on speed dial to help us out with anything we need. So, okay, cool. I think we can I'm going to stop recording.